Hi, and welcome to this session of the virtual Aspen Ideas Festival. I'm Jeffrey Goldberg. I'm the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic. I'm usually out at Aspen at this point in the year, but we're having a conversation today remotely with H.R. McMaster, former national security advisor to President Trump, former Army general, current Hoover Institution fellow, and also a lecturer at Stanford University's Business School, an expert on many things. We're going to talk today mainly about the largest foreign policy issue, I think, facing the United States, possibly through this century, which is the rise of China. So first of all, welcome to the conversation. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for wearing a tie. Very un-Aspen-like, but that's okay. This year you get a pass.
I still have my Zoom Lululemon pants on though, Jeff. Just a little maybe TMI for you, but
Yeah. Well, no, we're gonna leave that. We're gonna hide. We're gonna make believe that didn't happen, and we're just gonna go right in. Hey, people do all kinds of crazy things in a pandemic. So just start us off by contextualizing this. I asserted my own view that by far and away the major challenge facing the United States over the next decades, if not through the century, is going to be the rise of China, and particularly China's global aspirations, because we haven't, as a country, seen another country with global aspirations since the demise of the Soviet Union. So frame this out. Am I being over dramatic, or is this, to your mind, a paramount challenge facing the United States foreign policy makers?
Jeff, I think it's the defining competition of this century. And it's not just because it's the rise of China, right? We want China to succeed, but it's really the policies of the Chinese Communist Party, and especially now how aggressive China has become in exporting its authoritarian mercantilist model, even as it extends and tightens its exclusive grip on power internally through brutal means, including a campaign of slow genocide in Xinjiang and the extension of the party's repressive arm into Hong Kong, and of course this race to perfect a technologically enabled Orwellian police state.
Right. Let's pause on something you said, because I want to get a definition, and I want you to answer a question about that definition. The definition I want is authoritarian mercantilist set of policies. Tell us what you mean by that, and if you could also answer this question, which I think is out there. There was always this assumption that if China opened up, if its economy opened up, politics would open up and society would open up in turn. Sounds to me, based on what you're saying and also what I've read from you, that you don't believe that the opening has obviously happened. But talk about, what do you mean by an authoritarian mercantilist state? And is that very different from a communist expansionist state?
Well, it is different, but it's also the same in a lot of ways. I mean, it is a Leninist model based on Xi Jinping thought on socialism with Chinese characteristics, which, if you can get through, essentially means, hey, the people don't have a say in how they're governed. The party has absolute power. There is no such thing as rule of law. I mean, you can read speeches by Xi Jinping on rule of law. What he means is the opposite of rule of law. You have, I think, in China, this Orwellian reversal of the truth going on every day. It is an approach to governing that means that you're not allowed to criticize the government. You're not allowed to exercise any degree of freedom of speech. There's no due process of law. And this model is being exported. I mean, if you look at Zimbabwe, is the perfect client state for China, right? Because they've been able to establish the same means of population control, the same effort to extinguish what we would regard as unalienable rights. I think if you look at other states that have adopted this kind of authoritarian model, it's on the Korean Peninsula north of the 38th parallel, and it's countries like Cambodia, Laos, and so forth. And so I think what we can see is really tangible examples of, if China succeeds in exporting this model, that the world will be less free, less prosperous, and less safe.
You stay with this for one more round, because it sounds like what you're describing is a country that has the authoritarian tendencies of the Soviet Union, but a functioning or highly functioning economy, unlike the Soviet Union. So this is is what we're seeing from your perspective a completely new model?
It's a new model. It's sadly been enabled by us and our flawed assumptions about the nature of the Chinese Communist Party and the belief in particular that as China was welcomed into the international economic order, this is the aspect of this challenge that makes it, I think, fundamentally different from the challenge that we faced with the Soviet Union during the Cold War, for example. But the assumption was that China would play by the rules. And then as China prospered, it would liberalize its economy. And then it would liberalize its form of governance. It didn't do that. And what China has been able to do is to use our free market economic system against us with a statist model, right, that invests in not only state-owned enterprises, but heavily subsidizes so-called private companies in China. It combines those unfair economic practices with a sustained campaign of industrial espionage under Made in China 2025. There's a program for it, actually. And then the integration of military and civilian enterprise in such a way that China, as it extracts sensitive technology and intellectual property, applies that to gaining what it hopes will be a preponderant advantage in the emerging data-driven global economy and in advanced manufacturing, but also a differential advantage over the rest of the world militarily as well.
Now, there are a lot of people, obviously, who would say that people who hold your views, which are hawkish, are overstating the case. You're looking for a new Soviet threat. And this has just come up in nuclear posture review. It's now the position of the Pentagon that China is becoming a strategic nuclear threat as opposed to a regional nuclear threat. What do you say to the critics who say that China actually could work with us and that our policies are creating a more recalcitrant Xi Jinping?
Yeah. Well, this is what I call in battlegrounds, Jeff, strategic narcissism, right? This tendency to define the world only in relation to us, and to think that Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party they have no aspirations beyond what they do in reaction to us. Actually, they have fears and emotions and aspirations and an ideology of their own. And so I think what we have to do is, first of all, listen to what Xi Jinping says, right? Because he has been defining this competition mainly in ideological terms. And then we have to watch what they do. So I would just give you a quick rundown, right? How about foisting COVID-19 on the world? How about suppressing anybody? Going after anybody who tried to ring the alarm bells. These are journalists and doctors. How about insult to injury with wolf warrior diplomacy? Hey, what about that campaign of genocide in Xinjiang? How about the extension of the party's repressive arm into Hong Kong? How about bludgeoning Indian soldiers to death on the Himalayan frontier, or the campaign of economic coercion against Australia, or the largest land grab in history if they succeed in the South China Sea? Did the United States make Xi Jinping do all that? I don't think so.
Let me, at the risk of going into a cul-de-sac, you mentioned the virus, the pandemic. You seem to have a very hard line on China's responsibilities in this. Could you talk about that for 1 second? Just because it's obviously, especially the lab issue has come back in force in recent weeks.
Well, I just think it's clear from the timeline, Jeff. I mean, this has been laid out so clearly, right? This is suppressing the news of human-to-human transmission. This is like with the SARS epidemic, a lack of cooperation, a lack of transparency. The shutting down of domestic travel before international travel, the sowing of all these kind of conspiracy theories to deflect blame, right? The lack of transparency, even just a month or so ago, when the World Health Organization investigative team arrived in China. So, I think when you add all that up, I think you have to come to the conclusion that at least I would be surprised if it didn't come from a lab. Otherwise, why would China go to such great pains to cover it up and to impede any effort?
Do you have any evidence that this came from the lab as opposed to animal to human transmission?
It's all the evidence that you saw, Jeff. Right, the fact that there isn't, that there isn't evidence of a transmission through an animal carrier, which typically is the case. You find that, the fact that those two labs were there in Wuhan doing that kind of research. You saw obviously the State Department cable that predated the pandemic warning of low standards. And then I think you just look at the, kind of the circumstantial evidence of the way the parties handled this. So I'm like you. I'm reading everything I can about it and trying to come to a judgment. I have not come to a judgment yet, but if I had to bet right now, I would bet in a leak from a lab.
So let me ask you a question. It sounds like you're describing inevitable collisions between two superpowers, the dominant superpower and the rising superpower. Are there any off ramps here?
Yeah, Jeff,
Are there any off ramps that the United States could build?
Yeah, I think it's the opposite. It's not inevitable, right? In fact, I think the old strategy of cooperation and engagement with China under the assumption that China was going to play by the rules and liberalize, I think that had us on a path to confrontation because China was emboldened. I think transparent competition is the way to go, right? And to really try to convince Chinese Communist Party leaders over time, hey, you can have enough of your dream without pursuing that dream at the expense of your own people's rights or at our expense in terms of future generations. And I think that to do that we need a very strong multinational effort, right? I think that this is a free world. This is an all world problem, and I'm encouraged, I think, by the emphasis that the Biden administration has put on multinational cooperation. I think what China will do and what I describe in Battlegrounds is this. It is a strategy of co-option, coercion, and concealment. And what China will do is try to divide and conquer, right? And I think if we speak with one voice, if we act together to maybe take a Hippocratic oath with China, at least first don't do any harm, right? Don't aid and abet the Chinese Communist Party. Focus on our competitive advantages and try to grow those competitive advantages, strengthen our democratic institutions and processes, strengthen the fourth estate and investigative journalism internationally, strengthen rule of law, continue to accentuate the advantages associated with our unchecked entrepreneurialism here in this country, right? While we make some investments associated with critical technologies, as you see, like in the Endless Frontiers Act, for example.
Let me ask you this about the way the United States has managed the Chinese challenge. You obviously worked for a president who was criticized for alternately accommodating China and then being recalcitrant about China. I'm wondering if you could talk about your own experience in that administration, the Trump administration, and maybe flip it also and talk about a president over the last 40 years who you think got it right, more or less, recognizing that it's, of course, a hard thing to do.
Well, I think what you have to do is understand any of these challenges to national and international security on their own terms, view them through the lens of vital interests, craft overarching goals and more specific objectives, right? And then understand the degree to which we, the United States and like-minded partners, have agency and influence over that challenge. That's the kind of framing we did, Jeff, in March of 2017 on China. And what we did with all of these foreign policy challenges that we identified, the first order challenges, was to try to identify the implicit underlying assumptions on which previous policies rested and challenge them, right? And when we did that, we concluded that we had clung too long to these flawed assumptions about China and that we needed to effect, I think, the most significant shift in U.S. foreign policy since the end of the Cold War, and that's a shift to a competitive approach to China. And we needed to recognize that we have to compete. Jeff, we were losing in this competition in large measure because we vacated key arenas of competition based on those flawed assumptions, right? And if you're not on the pitch, so to speak, you're going to get your ass beat. Right? So a lot of this was, re-entering arenas of competition, but we were determined to do it in a transparent way and not to foreclose on opportunities for cooperation. But I think that this is an approach I think that's going to carry over into the Biden administration, the next administration after that. It should not be a partisan issue.
Let me ask you one more question for a 20-second answer, and this is not fair to you. You'll see the question, but we are running out of time. The question is, if China tries to make a military move against Taiwan, do you think, A, the United States should intervene militarily, and B, will intervene militarily?
Well, I think on the A, I think this policy, the policy of strategic ambiguity is useful, right? It's useful for two reasons. First of all, it keeps China guessing, right? And what you want to do is deter China by denial. For China to conclude, hey, I can't accomplish my objectives through the use of force if you're Xi Jinping. But I think it would be a grave mistake for China to think the United States won't intervene, right? The U.S. has intervened in previous Taiwan Strait crises, and North Korea and China made a bad assumption in June of 1950 as well. So I think what is most important is for Taiwan to realize it's in a race now. Taiwan's in a race to develop its own defensive capabilities such that the People's Liberation Army, the Chinese Communist Party would conclude, hey, we can't do this by force. Now, Taiwan also, though, has to harden itself and strengthen itself against Chinese efforts to accomplish its objectives in Taiwan below the threshold of what might elicit a concerted military response. And I think this is where China's failing. I think that the Taiwanese people have learned vicariously through the fate of Hong Kong's population, and their resolve is stiffened, right, to prevent China from subverting Taiwan politically and from within, and economically as well.
H.R. McMaster, thank you very much for joining us at the virtual Aspen Ideas Festival. Thanks very much for joining us.
Hey, thanks, Jeff. Great to be with you.